What's going on with y'all tonight or today, depending on where you are? Uh, I'm going to go ahead and get into a couple of new parts to this segment in the series that I'm building on. I want to actually demonstrate to you guys how I see it, how I see the hustle as far as not only on the streets, but taking this hustle from the streets and being able to take this hustle into turning it into some form of a community development program or piece. Is something that you could teach a child or an older person to do that can not only just help them to generate passive income for themselves, but would also teach them a lot of discipline, a lot of training actually to get into some of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about here on this particular episode. But I'm going to make it about like a couple of parts because as you know, in the last episode we were building on the game that they had, and we was talking about the Chiefs versus the Browns, and we was using that for an example, and that's what we're going to do here on this episode. We're going to use that score from what I saw the score was, because as you guys know, things can be changed around and shifted. That's why I'm going to break this episode down in three parts. What I mean by that is that sometimes you get online, man, and get these scores, and then you come back on there, and it said that was the final score, but then you come back on there later on, and they done switched the score up, and you find out that wasn't the exact score. But from my last look at it, researched, the final score was a 17-22, with the Chiefs winning. From what I saw, the Chiefs won 22-17, and that's not really super important until the next part. As far as like me going into like the actual numbers, I'm going to use those numbers for an example. But what I want to actually do here on this part is to show you the whole program, like how to map it out from like point A to Z. As you guys see, I got my notes. So I'm going to show you guys like how to just like map it out, like a basic idea of how to use a score of any sort, essentially, and turn that into not only a profit, but turn that into an actual account that you can generate credit from in the future, so that you can invest into other exchanges and trades. Is what we're going to go into. So first, you're going to need to really do this. You're going to need really what I call Belzoni's chamber, is what I call it. And in Belzoni's chamber, in the real world, they would say, like just a piece of real estate or something like that. They would say like, you need something like backing or somewhere to kind of like set up this type of operation out of, or like a location is what they would call it. I'm going to go ahead and call it Belzoni's chamber because of the fact that I want to teach you how to do this freelance. Meaning that, like, what's going to happen if something happens and you can't be in your location, or you can't be in your current building or where you reside or whatever. You're going to need some form of a base or structure or point of operation to do some type of ritual or hustle like this that I'm putting together for you guys. So basically what I'm saying is that you're going to need a location or somewhere that no matter what, you're going to always have access to, like no matter what, once you start this. Because if you decide to get into this type of thing, it's going to eventually lead into like a lot of digital currency and a lot of trades. And you can mess your money up if you don't kind of like have like a base or source of like where a 0 point is what I would call it, like a black dot. Like for instance, when you draw a circle with a compass, you have a point. To make that circle, you have to have a point, or center is what's actually called a center. So you need a center or a building. So in this case, I use Belzoni's chamber for an example. And I'll walk you into more of that in future episodes as well, as to what I do have a video called Belzoni's chamber. You can go check that out on the other channel, just to get an idea of what that is to me, so you can understand what the hell I'm even talking about, in this episode. But I use Belzoni's chamber, which is to me just a digital bank that you can kind of just use a series of numbers. It has to be in a certain zip code or in a certain area, and you can use this area to, I guess you could say, multiply units from. So it's like a place or a source that you would use to multiply units from. So you're going to need that. You're gonna need some form of a chamber or some form of a not just see. It can't just be like that's what I'm saying, like a chamber, because it can't just be like like in some hotel or something like that. It has to be somewhere sacred though to you, like somewhere that you consider like, okay, this is sacred. So it could be outside or wherever, but this is where you're going to operate from every day. This is your 0 point. This is where you will always come back to do your numbers, your figures, whatever. This is your source. So you have to feel like you have total ownership there, in your mind. If you don't, then if you don't feel that way, then it's going to mess up some of the future stuff that we're going to talk about. So that's number one. If you don't have that a center, you can't move into the next level of what we're going to go into. So we're going to go follow these next few steps real quick, and then I'm going to come back at you with another episode in the future, in the very near future, and I'm going to use the game as a real life example. So once the score is generated, in this case we're talking about the sports score, it's generated on the net, of course, right? So that's a contract, period. Anytime a number is generated on the net, this is credit. That's right. This is credit. This is credit, and you have to figure out how you're gonna use this credit. To you, should be a check, depending on where you're at, and then you have to like decide how you're gonna use this check, and that's what I'm gonna get into. So you need a signature to use this check. You need some form of a signature to use this check. So like, what I mean by that is that you have to like, it has to be by hand. So you have to have a way to account for the units that you have just viewed. So like say for instance you saw a score, like I'm using that for an example, the game, the Chiefs versus the Browns, and if it was true that the Chiefs did win at 22 and the Browns lost at 17, these units, depending on where you're coming from, the spectrum, because you can play from the loser perspective. That's right, you can trade from the loser perspective and make a profit, yes, or the winner perspective, just depending, and it's up to you. It would be in your best interest to figure out which vantage point you want to use, because you might not want to play from the winner's perspective starting out, because you might not make as much credit or money. You might want to play from the loser's perspective, depending on where you're at. So say for instance you're using number 17. If you was playing from the Browns perspective, you have to have a way to account for the number 17. You have to. It's called a signature though, by hand. So you have to have 17 units essentially in Belzoni's chamber. 17 units that you produce, and you're like, what am I going to use? I'm going to have to help you with that in the future. It's deep. Like you have to have something by hand that you created 17 of. Essentially, is what it is, and then you store that as a contract, because that's what's called a mercantile contract. Is what it is. By hand is what it is, and you use this as collateral to move into and to use this credit. So this is what you would use as your proof, essentially, if you were questioned about, what do you have, or what type of proof do you have saying that you have the right to use these units. This is the proof right here. So then you're going to follow these units in the market. You have to have some form of a way to follow these units in some form of a market for the next 20 days. So that's where it's going to get interesting at, because you're going to have to come out your box a little bit. So you're going to have to either have somewhere that you sell at, or something that you do in a market that you generate profit from the next 20 days based upon these units. Because once you put the units in stone, you have to make the units operate. So you're going to need some form of a market or somewhere to demonstrate the units. So meaning, basically what I'm saying is that, say for instance, you are a person that you're a traveling salesperson, or what may have you. You're going to need a market or a way to move 17 units. I mean, to move units, not 17, I'm sorry, to move units for the next 20 days. You're going to have to keep a contract or a log on the units that you move for the next 20 days. 20 days is very important when you're using any form of a credit signature or score signature. And then I'll get more into that in future episodes. So after the 20 days is up, what happens is that you now have what's called mint in the mercantile industry. This is called mint. So this is when something becomes what I would call hard. in the industry because now it's been in cycling for at least 20 days, so now it's in concrete and stone. So what I mean by that is that whatever uh, income or whatever, I guess you can say, yeah, income is a good word that you bring in from the units that you just produce by hand. This is what's going to turn into what's called your mint. So any type of income, I don't care if you have a job or whatever you did for those 20 days, you have to keep a log and keep that in stone. And this is going to turn into what's called a mint, like in the next 20 days. So like you may say, for instance, you made in those 20 days, you made $50,000 in those 20 days. That $50,000 in those 20 days turns into your mint. This is almost going to be like a block of gold to you. This is what makes it different from just using currency and money and putting it into a bank account and just leaving it alone. When you use scores and things of that nature in this method that I'm talking about, this is how the sovereign uses his own bank. This is how the sovereign creates his or her own bank account actually. That's backed by, and it can even turn into a currency for you. That's backed by something. You have a score and everything generated from the top. So you need a unit of measurement. So the score is basically the unit of measurement used, and you're going to need that because that's going to determine how you're going to reinvest back into the market depending on the number of the score. So I'm going to use the number 17 for an example in future videos to help you to understand how you would work with that kind of a number, as far as investing that number back into the market. So what I'm saying is that when you come into the market though, with this 20-day plan, I have to make this very clear. When you come into the market with this 20-day plan though, you coming in from the perspective of, say for instance, if you was using this example that I'm using, you coming in from the perspective of the number 17 though, which is very important because that was the number that was left on the score. So you coming into the market operating as the number 17, as that's the number that you come into the market literally as. And this is why working with a score in business is different than working just coming to work every day. Because you work as that number versus just coming to work every day and you're just nothing. It's just another day, another dollar. No, you come as that number for 20 days. Then it mints, and then this turns into what's called a bank account and a figure that you can essentially generate credit from. You can turn this into interest or generate interest from this. And over time, this can turn into a will that you can will to someone else. So we're going to get into, I said a lot. I want to let that kind of sink in. And then we're going to, as we go on for these next few videos, I'm going to make it interesting, of course, but we're going to be building on these ideas that I just kind of dropped on you because I know it may be like, it's not a lot, but just a collage of different information I'm putting on you because this is a new program and a lot of people may not understand. I'm going to give you a good example. That's why I'm using a game for an example because it'll give you a live feed or a way to follow this thing as I teach it. So you're going to lock these figures in. This is a note now. Everything I just told you above that you do and that you create or that you have created with this hustle slash, genius business program actually turns into a note, believe it or not. And I'm going to do like a couple of different more parts to kind of get into like how you would use that note to move into different time zones, different markets, different economies. Say for instance, if you want to travel, you can use this note. Same unit, generate credit from it. You would keep it on your person in a certain type of way and seal it up in a certain type of way so that the different entities won't be able to come at you and use your note for their credit. You would have a seal on it. So this is going into what's called a Z folder. So the last thing I'll point out here is that I'll go ahead and shut down. What you got to remember is that you have to have access. When you start working these rituals, you have to have access to different numbers. And this may sound like a lot, but just keep following me. You'll understand this as we go on more with these different lessons. So you have to know if you have like the access to be able to really access certain numbers. You have to know that. So like for instance, there are certain numbers that you may not have access to. You may have to work with someone else to gain more access to generate more credit off of that number. because it may be your age is the reason why you don't have access to it. See, that's the thing. Like a lot of young people, they can do well with this, but you may have to have some form of a mentor, someone that you work with that's a little bit older when you get deep into these rituals, because some of these folders in sports, you can't even access the credit from it unless you either have certain high level mints to be able to access it, which is what I was telling you about earlier, but I'll explain that to you more. You'll need certain high level mints to access certain aspects of this folder, or you're going to need some form of an old elder or someone that you can go to access certain credit, because you might not have the credit to be able to access certain levels of what you're going to generate from this particular figure that you're working with. So I know that's a lot. I hope you to understand more. Didn't mean to drag this out. I'm going to go ahead and get this up, and I thank you for listening and watching, and be looking out for part 2 and 3 on this Kansas game and this Cleveland game, and following this game from a metaphysical perspective, and using this to not only put together a nice ritual to keep your mind stimulated from the bullshit that's out there, but also using this as a way to create a nice passive income for yourself and your family. So I'll come back at you with another episode. Thanks again.